Hey, what's up everyone? Tim here from Everyday Tactical Vids, and today in this video we're going to go for a hike in the woods and look for 5 natural survival shelters. Now when I say survival shelter, I don't mean long-term base camp, I don't mean setting up a tarp or a tent or anything like that. I mean you're out in the woods, maybe night is starting to fall and all of a sudden you realize maybe you're lost or you've sprained an ankle and you're not going to be able to hike out. So we're talking about shelters that nature gives to us and we can spend the night there. Maybe it's a good place to set up camp, give us a little cover from the environment, maybe a good place to build a fire, maybe a good place to get located. Whatever it is, it's what nature has provided, and we're going to head out into the woods to see what we can find. In addition to the 5 shelters we're going to be looking for today, I want to give you 5 tips on things you should be thinking about and aware of when you're looking for that survival shelter. My companion on this hike today is going to be this right here, which is the Utica Cutlery Company UTK B6 Survival Knife. Now at the end of this video, I'll talk a little bit about this knife and also 2 other knives that are in their survival knife line. These are nicely made, USA made, and a very reasonable price, so definitely stay tuned to the end of the video to hear more about these knives. In the meantime, let's head deeper into the woods. Okay, what you're looking at behind me is shelter area number 1. And the reason I chose this is because of the hemlock trees. If you know anything about hemlock trees, they're a great resource in a lot of different ways. First, when it comes to shelter, the branches often kind of overlap like this, and if you get a bunch of the trees in the same area, they'll kind of form a canopy over where you're staying. Now, because it's late winter, it's been snowing throughout the winter, there's snow pretty much everywhere around here. But there is actually less snow in this area right where I am because the snow hasn't gotten through as easily when you have all this coverage of the hemlock trees. Now beyond the coverage, I also have a rock that's going to reflect heat back to me, and then the hemlock trees are going to give me good wood for starting the fire. It is a soft wood, so it's going to burn quickly, but a lot of dead branches on the undersides of hemlock trees gives you good resources. And then also, if I've got anything that I can actually boil water in, you can use hemlock, as in the evergreen version, not the poison hemlock, but hemlock, the evergreen version, to make a nice tea. And just a hot drink with a little bit of flavor when you're hunkering down for the night can make a big difference. All right, so I've got my coverage overhead from the hemlocks. I've got a rock I'm sitting on. I've got a rock over here that can reflect some heat back to me. Another thing I didn't mention is that if you get some hemlock boughs and then put them down on the ground, get yourself up off the cold ground, that'll reduce losing heat through conduction. Even just sitting on this mildly damp rock, I can already feel I'm starting to get a little bit wet. So if I can find some drier branches that are on the lower portions of these hemlocks, I can break some of those off, cut some of those off, put them on this rock, and then sit on that, you know, make my fire, have it set up so I'm reflecting the heat back to myself. And now I've got a place where, again, it's not perfect, but it's a better opportunity than just being out in the open for the night. I kept on hiking, and I just want to stop and show you this right here just to give you another picture of how hemlocks can offer coverage. So you can see pretty much snow everywhere else, but right underneath another cluster of hemlocks, you've got a drier spot, less snow. Now this has got a little bit of a slope, so it's not going to be great. But worst case scenario, I'm now not sitting in the snow. I get some boughs, I put them down, and I just lean up against the tree and spend the night. Again, hemlock, a great resource out in the woods. Okay, behind me here we have shelter number 2. You can see we have a rock overhang. Now there is some water dripping off the rock. What I need to do is I would need to get further in under the rock. So if I kind of am partially out, it's gonna probably drip on me in the night. But you can see there's a bunch of leaves on the ground there because it's dry. They haven't been hit by a lot of the snow. So again, I'd get some branches, some hemlock, something like that, maybe some leaves, fill that spot right up against the rock and then push up against it and then put a fire right out here so that heat would reflect back to me and warm me up. Now, one thing to be aware of when you're underneath a rock is there any chance that the rock is going to fall down on top of you? So just be aware of that, particularly out west when you have a lot of fragmenting of rocks, or if you're in a place where there's a lot of slate and that's, you know, it's very fractured rock, you want to be aware of that. I don't have any concern with this huge piece of granite that in the middle of the night, because of the heat or something, it's going to crack and then fall down on top of me. So here's a place I could tuck into to spend the night, make a fire, and it would generally be better than being out and exposed just to the elements. Here's a look at this from another angle. You could see that the water is dripping out here, but if I really tuck myself in underneath there, I'd likely be pretty dry for the night, and with a nice fire, that would definitely be a bonus. The next shelter I want to talk about is a big downed tree. Now, this thing is probably 1 3/4 to 2 feet across. So if I get myself underneath there, again, if I get a lot of rain blowing in from the side, not so great. But getting under here is going to give me more shelter than being out and totally exposed. The key to doing this is to look where the tree has fallen or what it's leaning on. If it's very precarious, then you don't want to get under this, because if it falls in the middle of the night, there's a good chance you're dead. However, this one looks sturdy at that end, the other end is sturdy, and the bonus of this one is that you have this bark. Look at this huge piece of bark. If I set this up on either side of me, or even on one side so I could build a fire and reflect heat, now all of a sudden I've got even more of a shelter in addition to what's over top of my head. As you can see, there's a lot of hemlock around still. I'm gonna just cut some of these small branches to put into my shelter under this huge log so you can see what it actually looks like. Let's take a look at the shelter now. It took about 10 minutes of work to do what you're about to see here. So again, we've got the large log, which is my roof. I took some of that bark off and I put it as kind of a back wall. So I've got a little bit of coverage from wind, and if I have a fire maybe out here, that can reflect some of the heat underneath. And then using my Utica Cutlery knife, I took some hemlock boughs and started to put it down there on the ground. Now I would get more hemlock boughs if they were in the area and if I didn't have to wander too far, you know, late at night. But that's a start. I would definitely be much more comfortable staying there for the night than just out in the open. I want to pause here and talk about the word shelter briefly. For me, when I think of shelter in the woods, I generally think of something to cover me, to keep rain, snow, sleet, that type of stuff from landing on me, and where I could basically spend the night. Now, at the highest level, when you think of shelter like your home, you probably think of a roof to keep weather off of you, walls to keep the wind and the cold out, a heat source, a floor, something to keep you up off, you know, the cold earth. Now, from that 30,000 foot level, let's go back down to what's expected and what's fair to expect in a survival situation. You know, the chance that you're going to have something over your head, something surrounding you, it's pretty limited. I mean, you might find an awesome cave that you got the best hookup ever. Well, then great, you got a really nice shelter. But when I think about shelters in a survival situation, it's getting late, I don't have a lot of time to find one. I'm looking for one or multiple pieces of a shelter. So maybe it's covering, maybe it's walls to reflect heat to me, maybe it's walls to make sure that I feel safe so that things can't come at me in different spots in the middle of the night, you know, if I'm in an area where there are large predators or something like that. So as we look for these shelters, it's pretty unlikely we're gonna find a shelter that meets all the needs perfectly, but we're looking for shelters that hit at least one or maybe a couple of those various needs. For our fourth shelter, we've got a nice mix of some of the features we've seen so far in our earlier shelters. Got a big hemlock tree right here, so that's going to give me cover as well as the resources for fire, tea, etc. I've got a nice big rock behind me, so that's going to reflect heat when I make a fire. That's going to bounce off that rock and come back and warm me up. The rock is huge, it's solid, it's not going to crack or fall on me in the middle of the night. The other thing is we have a bunch of overhangs so I could really, you know, nestle in, and I'll take you on a little tour of this area in 1 second. But, you know, without having to build a huge, you know, covering with branches and all kinds of stuff, I've got a place that's going to get me out of rain if it starts to fall. Now, the one other thing I want to show to you is the range of view here. I have easily over 180 degrees range of view, and that's a big deal because, you know, if in the middle of the night you see a light way off in the distance and you got a busted leg or a bad ankle, whatever it is, you can be like, hey, that's a flashlight, and you can start yelling or signaling. If you're deep, you know, in cover and you can't see anything else but right, you know, 10, 15 feet away, well, that's going to limit who can see you and who you can see. So if I have a fire up here on this little hill and I'm looking out and maybe somebody's in the distance and they see my fire because they're looking for me, well, now I have a better chance of being located. So let me take you on a little tour of this area, and then we'll take a look out to see just this big range of view that we have. Here you can see some of the overhanging rock, and it's already dry underneath, so that's nice. So I could definitely nestle in there at night. And then you could see just this massive rock that's going to reflect heat to me. Up there is the hemlock tree. And let me take you over to this little seat that I found as well. So right over here, I could actually sit right here, nestled into that rock, you know, and just keep an eye out for maybe what I could see off in the distance if there was somebody coming to look for me. Here's a look at my view from up here. So this is looking back toward kind of the sleeping area under there, and then looking out. Now there's various ponds and small lakes here, but I mean, you can see a great deal all the way back to that direction, which is where the trail is that I came down. So just a lot of area to see. So if I did see headlamps, flashlights, or just gives me a chance to hear better because I'm not, you know, nestled back in some corner in the woods. One other thing I want to mention about setting up a shelter near water, especially like a lake or a pond, is that sound carries well across those types of bodies of water. A little different when you're next to like a roaring river or something like that. But if you're near a pond and somebody yells, that sound is going to carry nicely across the pond to you or from you out to that person. So that's another advantage of having a wide open space like that, especially with water. You yell and that sound is going to travel for quite a bit. All right, shelter number 5 is more like location number 5, and it's set up your shelter, where you're staying the night, your base camp, your survival location, whatever it is, right on the trail. I'm just sitting on a rock here. I can make a nice big fire next to me to stay warm during the night. You can see I've got some dry spots behind me. If I wanted to go lay down, I could get some hemlock boughs, put it on top of that, and I'm still right close to the trail. There's hemlocks around me, so if it starts to rain or snow, I could duck under those for some cover. But just think about it, if you're right on the trail and someone's coming through, even if they're not looking for you, like they're out for a night hike and then they're like, what the heck is this guy doing on the trail? You strike up a conversation, you're like, hey, I'm injured, can you go get help? So you want to be close to the trail or right on the trail for this last option, because then there's a good chance you could get located. There are dangers of going too far away from the trail, and we're going to show you that in just a minute. Before I talk about the 5 ideas you want to think through when it comes to finding that natural shelter, I'm going to throw in a little bonus here. Now, it's not a natural shelter per se, but if you look behind me here, you can see there's wood that's been used to build kind of a walkway across a damp area so hikers will keep their feet dry when they walk. But if you're here and it's heading toward nighttime and maybe you're lost or you're injured, you know you can't get all the way out, if there's natural materials, great. If there's man-made materials, you can use those as well. These things are pretty heavy, but if you found something like that that you could move around and kind of rig up so it offers you some shelter, well, now you got a little bit more shelter for the night. The first thing I always encourage people to think about when it comes to locating a survival shelter is what I call the up, down, out theory. So what's up over me, what's down on the ground, and what's out and about that could cause me harm. When it comes to things that are over my head, often those are called widow makers, branches that could fall out of a tree, or an entire tree falling on you in the middle of the night. So right here, we've got probably a 10-foot section of a tree, very large, heavy, and it's just wedged into those tiny branches up there. So if you get a real big gust of wind in the middle of the night and your shelter is set up somewhere under there, that thing could fall on you and really hurt you or even kill you. So definitely check overhead. Are there things that could fall on you in the middle of the night when you least expect it and cause serious injury? So I said up, down, out. Up is things overhead. Down is things you might set up your shelter on top of. In the winter, it's not going to be a big deal for me here in New Hampshire, but you know, think about where you're located. You don't want to set up on top of a hornet's nest or an ant's nest or something like that. For me, I'm thinking about these roots. I might think, oh, this is a good shelter overhead. But if I'm sleeping on those roots all night long, I might wake up just miserable. I might get no sleep at all. So just be aware of not only what's overhead, but also what you're setting your shelter up on top of. When it comes to the out part of the up, down, out concept, just be aware of where you're setting up in relation to dangers that are out and about. I set up a shelter one time right in the middle of a deer run. Now, it wasn't a danger per se to me, but in the middle of the night, I hear footsteps come through the woods, and then, 5 or 10 feet, when the deer finally figures out what I am, he's that close before he runs off. So be aware, are you putting your shelter, on top of an animal run? Are there other dangerous predators in the area that you want to be aware of? So think what's overhead, think what's on the ground, and think what's out and about when you're selecting your shelter location. All right, so tip number 1 is the up, down, out concept. Tip number 2 is don't underestimate the importance of a shelter. So you're out in the woods, you're lost, you're nervous, you're scared, whatever it is, having a home base to come to makes a huge difference. You get a fire going, it's right over by that tree. I'm gonna be here. This is kind of where I'm gonna be located for the next 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever it is. If you've ever been stuck during travel where they're like, oh, you're gonna have a layover for 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, it can be really mentally tough to just be like, I don't have a home base for this amount of time. I was stuck in Chicago one time for I think it was 18 hours waiting for a train back to New York City. And it was tough just kind of being there and not having a home base. So having a shelter, having a location, even if it's limited, it's not great, but having that home base makes a big difference for you, not only just physically, but mentally as well. Tip number 3 is know your resources. If you have an amazing shelter, but you have no access to firewood and you need a fire for the night to stay warm, well, you got to think about how great is that shelter. If you're going to be there for, say, 24 hours and it's really hot and there's no water around, well, you might want to sacrifice a little bit of that quality of shelter because you now have access to water. So just be aware of the resources you're going to need to stay alive, and don't just choose one particular area if it lacks all the other resources that you need. All right, tip number 4 is if you leave your shelter or your camp location at night, make sure you know how to get back there. If you go out and you think, oh, I'm sure it's just over that hill, and now all of a sudden you get lost and you left your backpack or other gear back at that location, well, now you're in a really dire situation. So if you're gonna leave camp and you've got maybe a bright bandana that you can hang on a tree, do that. Maybe the idea is, I'm just not gonna leave camp. I'm gonna stay within 15 feet or 10 feet of camp. Maybe it's I'm only gonna go as far as I can and still see the fire. Maybe if you have snow, you can stomp down a path so you can definitely see, okay, I went out this way, I'll come back on the same path. I've made debris huts and walked 20 feet away from them. And from the back side, I thought, if I didn't know that was there, as my debris hut, I wouldn't have any idea that that's a shelter. So just be aware to not find a nice shelter location and then wander away and lose it. Tip number 5 is this: to the best of your ability, stay close to a trail. What I'm gonna do is actually put the camera on time lapse, and then I'm gonna wander over toward that tree, and there's kind of a rock formation right next to it. So you'll see I'm probably less than 50 feet from the trail, but if I had made a fire just over there that was small and I was hunkered down around it, or say there's no fire and I've just found a good place to kind of nestle down, somebody could walk right by me, I might never hear them, and they might never see or hear me, and now I've lost an opportunity to be rescued. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, when I was out shooting this video, I was going to be checking out this knife. Again, it's the Utica Cutlery Company UTK B6. Now, this is not a full review. It's not a full rundown. This is kind of initial impressions as I've used it. It's kind of interesting how I got this knife. When I was at SHOT Show, my buddy David from Ultimate Survival Tips was like, hey, have you checked out Utica Cutlery Company? They got some cool knives. And I was like, yeah, I'll check it out. And then Aaron, my buddy from Gideon's Tactical, was like, hey, have you seen Utica? You should check it out. So I went and looked at them and was interested, but just too much going on right then. And then probably 2 weeks after SHOT Show, I got an email from Utica Cutlery Company. They're like, hey, do you want to test out our knives? And I said, look, I've just got a lot of things in the queue right now, but I will roll it into a video when I work on this video on, natural shelters for a survival situation. So that being said, I'll give you some of the specs here, and then I want to send you over to 2 places. Wingman 115 has checked out these knives, as has Aaron over at Gideon's Tactical. So there are links down below in the description section. And if you like the knives, I've got links to these knives so you can purchase them and help support the Everyday Tactical Vids channel. So a couple things to mention to you. First of all, this is the 6, but it's 7 inches long. The 4 is actually 4.5 inches long, and the 5 is 5 inches long. So you got a couple different options as far as sizes, and I'm guessing they did that as far as the names and numbers, just because there's all kinds of knife names and copyrights and patents and stuff out there. So that being said, you've got basically a 4.5, a 5, and a 7-inch option for these knives. This one, you can see it has the Bowie style blade there, a little bit of a clip. It is pretty comfortable in hand. You got some interesting jimping. So they're up on the top. You got nothing here on the back, but then underneath you can see some here and some here, and it does pop out a little bit. So just be aware of that. This cool two-tone thing with the black canvas micarta, and I don't know what this material is. It might be micarta as well, but just kind of a cool feature there. All the hardware kind of stands out. You got this pommel, so you can certainly break things with that. Choil there, so you can actually sharpen it all the way to the tip, or to the end there, I should say, of the blade, and then also get your finger up in there if you want to do some more detail work. It is big enough that you could kind of lock it in on your wrist and do some work like that. As I roll in the footage here, you'll see this thing did a pretty good job at a bunch of different tasks. It is USA made, it's $10.95. I think the Rockwell hardness is 58 to 59 if I remember, and it does come with a nice sheath system. Looks like a high density plastic. It's not Kydex. Does come with a lanyard, so you can put that on your sheath to, wrap it around your leg, or you can put it on the knife if you want to do that. Comes with this cool clip system that there's actually the clip runs through this side, and then it's actually behind here, so you can put the clip right hand, left hand, however you want to set it up. It does have a pull-through sharpener. I'm not a huge fan of pull-through sharpeners for general use, just to sharpen your knives. But in a pinch, this can actually help, put an edge back onto a knife. If you have a huge, nick out of your knife, you want to be careful not to use this, because this will just beat it up. But I really like this system because it locked in nice and firmly on my belt, which I'm wearing a rigger's belt today. So nice and secure on that. but it was easy to take off as well. It does lock in securely, so the knife doesn't feel like it's going to fall out at all. And then you have a fire steel included, and that locks in down like that. And then you take the fire steel out and you actually twist this top section off, and that's your striker and that's your fire steel. The spine of the knife is not made to do that. I find with knives that are, you know, close to a 90-degree edge, if I get just the right angle and hit it really hard, I can get a spark off a fire steel, but that's why they've included that. So yeah, I mean, these are definitely worth checking out. Am I going to do a review on these in the future? We'll see. We'll see what my schedule looks like, and as I use it more, if I want to do that. I do like they have different sizes. I love the fact that it's USA made. I think that's really cool. I went to school in Central New York, about an hour, maybe an hour and a half from Utica, so that's kind of cool. It's sort of my old stomping ground. So yeah, definitely check it out. This is the Utica Cutlery Company. This is the 7-inch, though it's called the 6, and then they also have the 4 and the 5 as well. So you got a bunch of different options. And again, links to Aaron from Gideon's Tactical and Wingman 115 are down below if you want to head over to their channels to see, you know, fuller reviews of, I don't know if they do all the knives, but at least some of the knives, so you can find out some more details on them. Well, I hope this was helpful to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. I also hope you never have to use any of these concepts or techniques in a real dangerous survival situation. If you're interested in purchasing any of those Utica Cutlery Company knives, you can use the links down below in the description section, and that'll help support the channel. And really, if you go into Amazon via those links and purchase anything, we get a very small cut of that, and that'll help to support what we're doing here at Everyday Tactical Vids. Again, I want to send you over to Wingman 115 and Gideon's Tactical if you want to see more specific information and reviews on the knives from the Utica Cutlery Company. Thanks for checking out the video. More videos coming soon. Take care.